You think this city actually respects you? Respect isn't something you can steal. Tomorrow, everyone will know you're just another criminal. You should have looked up first.
Would you look at this? Lieutenant Travis Keller sneered as he ripped a thick evidence box from Malcolm Reed's hands and slammed it onto the checkout counter, sending invoices and family photographs skidding across the floor. A black businessman with a shiny little hardware store actually thinks people see him as respectable. Men like you always polish the outside because the inside is rotten. Before Malcolm could answer, Officer Dean Mercer grabbed his collar, drove an elbow into his back, and forced him hard onto both knees in front of terrified customers. Mercer laughed. There it is. That's the position a black business owner ends up in the moment he forgets who really runs this city. The room fell silent. Keller slowly walked around Malcolm, then kicked over a display of community awards, shattering the glass. Those little plaques don't fool anyone, he mocked. You can donate to every charity in Ohio, but you'll never buy the kind of respect people like you keep pretending you've earned. Detective Laura Vance emerged from Malcolm's office carrying a sealed evidence bag. I found the gun. Keller raised it high for every news camera outside. See, he shouted. The hard-working black businessman was nothing but another criminal wearing a smile. I've never seen that weapon before, Malcolm replied calmly. Oh, you'll say anything now, Keller sneered. Tomorrow, every headline will remember you as the black store owner who lied to an entire city. Your customers won't even admit they knew you. He turned toward his officers. Smash every camera. Rip every wire out. I don't want 1 second of today's truth surviving. Battens crashed into security cameras. Sparks burst from torn cables as the recording server disappeared into an evidence cart. Mercer leaned close enough for only Malcolm to hear. When this ends, no jury, no reporter, and no judge will ever know what we did. For the first time, Malcolm smiled. His eyes settled on an ordinary smoke detector mounted above the checkout counter. You should have looked up first. Neither corrupt officer noticed the tiny green light blinking inside. Hundreds of miles away, FBI agents were already watching every second of the raid live. But before this story reveals how one honest man turned the biggest setup of his life into the downfall of an entire corruption ring, stay with us until the very end. Tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. We love hearing from viewers around the world. And if stories about courage, justice, and truth inspire you, subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Hey everyone, I've learned that every journey becomes more meaningful when we stop counting miles and start noticing moments. 3 months before Lieutenant Travis Keller proudly held a planted pistol above Malcolm Reed's head, Reed Community Supply opened exactly the way it had for nearly 15 years. At 6:30 every morning, Malcolm unlocked the front doors before sunrise. He believed a neighborhood woke up one honest conversation at a time. Contractors stopped in for coffee before heading to construction sites. Elderly homeowners came for gardening supplies. Young apprentices asked questions about tools they could barely afford. Malcolm knew most of them by name. Morning, Mr. Reed. Good morning, Eddie. How's your mother's roof holding up? Thanks to those shingles you let me pay off in installments. Dry as can be. Malcolm smiled. Good. Keep your money until next month. That was simply who he was. Long before owning the store, Malcolm had worked as a cybersecurity engineer for one of the nation's largest software firms. He could have earned millions designing corporate security systems, but after losing his wife Angela to cancer 7 years earlier, success no longer meant office towers or stock options. Together, they had dreamed of building something that actually mattered, something that gave ordinary people a chance. So Malcolm invested everything into Reed Community Supply. The business slowly became more than a hardware store. It became the heart of Belmont's West Side. People trusted Malcolm because he never exploited hardship. If a struggling contractor needed lumber before payday, Malcolm quietly extended credit. If a widow couldn't afford a new water heater, Malcolm found a way to lower the bill. If local churches organized neighborhood repairs, trucks from Reed Community Supply always arrived first. His generosity earned respect that money never could. Not everyone admired that reputation. At exactly 9:12 that morning, 2 police cruisers rolled slowly into the parking lot. The conversations inside the store stopped almost immediately. Lieutenant Travis Keller stepped through the entrance with Officer Dean Mercer following half a step behind. Neither man smiled. Keller looked around the crowded store before speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Nice business you've built." Malcolm walked forward politely. "Good morning, Lieutenant. Can I help you find something?" Keller ignored the question. Instead, he slowly examined the shelves. Power tools, lumber, electrical supplies. He nodded as if inspecting property that already belonged to him. "You've done well. I've been fortunate." "No," Keller corrected with a thin smile. "You've been allowed." Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mercer leaned casually against a forklift, while watching Malcolm without blinking. Keller finally looked him directly in the eye. "Let's talk somewhere private. My office is open." "No." Keller folded his hands behind his back. "I'd rather everyone hear this." The room became silent. "You own one of the busiest businesses in Belmont." Malcolm remained calm. "We've worked hard." "I'm sure you have." Keller took another slow step forward. "But businesses like yours attract problems." "What kind of problems?" "Break-ins, vandalism, unfortunate inspections, construction delays." He paused deliberately. "And misunderstandings with law enforcement." The meaning could not have been clearer. Malcolm answered without hesitation. "If there's a legitimate concern, we'll cooperate fully." Mercer chuckled. "You still don't understand." Keller reached into his jacket and removed a plain white envelope. He placed it carefully on the checkout counter. No paperwork, no contracts, no receipts, just appreciation. Malcolm never looked down at the envelope. "What exactly are you asking?" "I'm offering protection." "We already have insurance." Mercer laughed loudly. "Insurance doesn't answer 911 calls." Several customers quietly walked toward the exit. One elderly woman froze beside the paint aisle, pretending to compare color samples while listening. Keller lowered his voice just enough to sound conversational. "Every successful business contributes." "Contributes to what?" "And the people who make sure success continues." Malcolm understood completely. "So this is extortion." Mercer's smile vanished. Keller simply shrugged. "I prefer partnership." Malcolm slowly pushed the envelope back across the counter. "I don't pay public servants to do the jobs taxpayers already pay them to do." Silence. Absolute silence. Keller stared at Malcolm for several long seconds. Then he smiled. Not warmly, patiently. "As I said, you've done well." He glanced toward the security cameras mounted near the ceiling. "Very impressive surveillance system." Malcolm followed his gaze. "It protects my employees." Keller laughed softly. "Cameras are funny things. They only matter if someone decides the recordings matter." Mercer added another insult. "And when the police write the reports, those little cameras become expensive decorations." Without warning, Keller reached over and picked up Malcolm's framed Community Leadership Award. He examined it with exaggerated curiosity. Awarded for honesty. He smirked. People hand these things out too easily. He dropped the frame back onto the counter with a sharp crack that splintered one corner of the glass. Customers flinched. Malcolm's expression never changed. If you're finished damaging my property, I have customers to help. Mercer stepped forward until he was only inches away. You know what your problem is. Malcolm remained silent. You've lived behind this counter so long that you forgot whose town this really is. Keller nodded towards the broken frame. Think about my offer. You'll never receive another one. The two officers turned and walked toward the exit. Just before reaching the door, Keller looked back over his shoulder. Oh, when inspectors suddenly become curious, when permits take longer, when patrol cars stop driving past your business, don't tell yourself nobody warned you. The door closed. Only then did people begin breathing normally again. One customer quietly asked, Malcolm, should we call someone? He looked toward the security cameras. No. Not yet. Late that evening, after the last employee went home, Malcolm locked every entrance. He entered his office, closed the blinds, and replayed every second of Keller's visit. Then he opened a secure encrypted application hidden behind an ordinary accounting program. One contact appeared. No name, only a blue shield icon. Malcolm pressed the call button. The line connected almost instantly. A calm woman's voice answered. Rebecca Sloan. Malcolm looked once more at the footage showing Keller placing the white envelope on the counter. He finally said it out loud. There was a brief silence. Then the FBI agent replied quietly, Good. Now we can begin. Outside the darkened store across the empty parking lot, an unseen figure lowered a camera after photographing every security device mounted on the building. Someone else had already started planning the next move. The first inspection arrived less than 48 hours after Malcolm Reed rejected Lieutenant Travis Keller's envelope. At exactly 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, two city inspectors walked into Reed Community Supply carrying clipboards and cameras. We're conducting a surprise safety inspection. Malcolm nodded politely. You're welcome to inspect anything you need. For nearly 3 hours, they measured aisle widths, checked emergency exits, photographed electrical outlets, and wrote pages of notes. When they finally left, Malcolm asked one simple question. Did you find any violations? The senior inspector avoided eye contact. You'll receive a report. No report came. Instead, another inspection arrived 2 days later. Then another. By the end of the month, fire officials, health inspectors, zoning officers, environmental investigators, and police patrols had all visited the store. Customers began whispering, Why are the police here again? Did something happen? Is Malcolm in trouble? Malcolm answered every question with the same calm smile. No, please don't worry. But people were beginning to worry. 3 delivery trucks carrying lumber were stopped by patrol officers on the highway within the same week. Each search lasted nearly 2 hours. Each time nothing illegal was found. Each delay cost Malcolm thousands of dollars in canceled jobs. Inside the office, Tanya Reed dropped another stack of delayed invoices onto Malcolm's desk. This isn't random anymore. I know. They're bleeding us slowly. Malcolm studied the paperwork without looking up. We'll survive. Tanya crossed her arms. How can you sound so calm? Because panic is exactly what they want. Before she could respond, the front bell rang. Lieutenant Travis Keller walked in alone. He smiled as though he were an old friend stopping by for coffee. I heard business has been difficult. Malcolm remained behind the counter. What do you want? I came to see whether you've reconsidered my offer. My answer hasn't changed. Keller sighed dramatically. That's disappointing. He leaned across the counter. You see, Malcolm, people admire successful black business owners when everything is going well. His smile disappeared. But the moment doubt creeps in, they start looking for someone else to trust. Malcolm held his gaze. You underestimate this community. No, Keller replied quietly. I understand fear better than you do. He glanced toward the customers, pretending not to listen. They'll stop coming long before they admit they're afraid. Without another word, Keller walked out. The silence he left behind felt heavier than the conversation itself. That night, just after closing, Malcolm heard breaking glass. He rushed outside. A brick lay on the sidewalk beneath the shattered front window. Wrapped around it was a handwritten note. You still have time to pay. Tanya stared at the message. We're calling the police. Malcolm looked at her. We're not calling Keller. She wanted to argue. Instead, she watched him photograph the brick from every angle before carefully sealing it inside an evidence bag. The following afternoon, Malcolm drove across town to visit Elias Grant. The 63-year-old carpenter had spent decades restoring historic homes throughout Belmont. If anyone understood the city's history, it was Elias. When Malcolm arrived, Elias was sanding an old oak table. Without looking up, he said, "They came to see me too." Malcolm froze. Keller, Elias nodded. He asked whether I'd ever seen stolen materials come through your warehouse. What did you tell him? The truth. And Elias finally looked up. He said old men sometimes remember things incorrectly. A bitter smile crossed his weathered face. Then he suggested my business license could disappear if my memory didn't improve. Malcolm clenched his jaw. Elias. The older man raised one hand. Listen carefully. He stepped closer. You aren't the first business owner he's threatened. Malcolm frowned. What do you mean? There used to be another hardware supplier on the east side, Frank Dawson. He refused to pay. What happened? 3 months later, inspectors shut him down. And after that, no one ever saw Frank open another business. The words lingered heavily between them. That evening, Malcolm drove to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. Inside, a woman in plain clothes waited beside an unmarked SUV. Special Agent Rebecca Sloan. She listened without interrupting as Malcolm described every inspection, every threat, every delayed shipment. When he finished, she folded her arms. Keller is becoming impatient. So am I. You want us to arrest him now, don't you? Rebecca slowly shook her head. If we arrest Keller today, the officers working under him disappear. The politician protecting him walks away. And everyone paying him simply starts over with someone else. Malcolm looked away. My employees are paying the price. I know. Rebecca stepped toward a folding table covered with maps and photographs. We're not building a case against one corrupt lieutenant. She tapped several photographs. We're dismantling an entire organization. She slid a small black case across the table. What's this additional recording equipment? Malcolm opened the case. Inside were smoke detectors, emergency exit signs, motion sensors, delivery truck cameras, and tiny wireless microphones nearly impossible to detect. They don't record locally, Rebecca explained. They transmit encrypted copies directly to federal servers. So even if Keller destroys everything, the evidence survives. Malcolm slowly nodded. I'll install every one of them tonight. Unknown to either of them, someone watched from inside a parked sedan across the street. A camera lens slowly focused on Malcolm, carrying the equipment back toward his truck. Hours later, after midnight, Malcolm climbed a ladder inside the darkened store and quietly replaced an ordinary smoke detector above the checkout counter. Another hidden camera disappeared inside an emergency exit sign. A microphone was concealed beneath the front counter. By sunrise, Reed Community Supply looked exactly the same. Only Malcolm knew that nearly every corner of the building was now silently transmitting to the FBI. The next morning, employee Caleb Morris unlocked the warehouse and paused. His eyes settled on a small section of fresh wiring near the loading dock. He frowned. That's strange. From across the parking lot, a black sedan remained parked with its engine idling. Inside, an unknown man lifted a camera and quietly photographed every new device Malcolm had installed. Someone had noticed, and someone was preparing to strike. By the following week, Belmont was no longer asking whether Malcolm Reed owned the city's most trusted hardware store. People were asking whether he had been fooling them all along. The first rumor appeared on social media. A blurry photograph showed Malcolm standing beside a delivery truck with the caption, "Local business owner linked to stolen construction materials." No evidence, no source, only suspicion. Within hours, hundreds of comments flooded the post. I always thought he was too good to be true. Nobody gets that successful without cutting corners. I hope the police investigate. Malcolm read every word without responding. Across town, Councilman Robert Hale stood behind a podium during a city redevelopment meeting. We cannot allow corruption to hide behind community service, he announced to reporters. Any business receiving public renovation contracts must be investigated thoroughly. He never mentioned Malcolm by name. He didn't have to. Every journalist in the room already knew exactly who he meant. That evening, Samantha Cole's report aired on the local news. We're not accusing anyone of wrongdoing, she said professionally. However, city officials have confirmed that Reed Community Supply is now the subject of multiple investigations involving possible construction irregularities. Customers watching from home heard only one thing: multiple investigations. The next morning, Reed Community Supply felt different. The parking lot that was usually full sat half empty. Several contractors called to postpone orders. Others canceled entirely. One supplier demanded payment in advance, after 15 years of doing business together. Tanya stared at the growing list of cancellations. This is getting out of control. Malcolm quietly organized invoices. It'll pass. She slammed another folder onto his desk. No, Malcolm. Her voice trembled with frustration. They've looked through our taxes. They've questioned our suppliers. Stu. And this morning, the bank called asking about unusual police requests for our financial records. She looked directly at him. What aren't you telling me? Malcolm remained silent. Not because he didn't trust Tanya. Because the fewer people who knew about the FBI operation, the safer they would be. I'll handle it. She shook her head. That's not an answer. Before Malcolm could reply, Caleb Morris hurried into the office. There's a police cruiser outside. Malcolm looked through the window. Officer Dean Mercer leaned casually against his patrol car. He wasn't there to investigate. He was waiting. Caleb swallowed nervously. I don't like the way he keeps looking at me. An hour later, Caleb left work carrying groceries for his younger brother. Halfway to his truck, Mercer stepped out from behind another parked vehicle. Busy day. Caleb forced a smile. I guess. Mercer slowly circled him. Your brother was released 2 years ago. Caleb's face immediately hardened. What about him? It would be a shame if his parole officer suddenly discovered new concerns. My brother hasn't done anything. Mercer shrugged. Neither had plenty of people who ended up back in jail. He removed a folded sheet of paper. It contained the warehouse access codes for Reed Community Supply. We hear Malcolm changes these often. Caleb stared silently. We need the current ones. I can't do that. Mercer stepped closer. Can't. Or won't. I work for Malcolm, and your brother enjoys sleeping in his own bed. The threat hung heavily in the air. Mercer smiled coldly. You've got 48 hours. He climbed back into the cruiser and drove away. Caleb remained standing beside the curb long after the patrol car disappeared. His hands shook uncontrollably. That evening, Tanya finally confronted Malcolm inside the empty warehouse. I've watched this family fight for everything we have. She closed the office door behind her. And now you're standing here pretending everything is under control while our business is falling apart. Malcolm looked exhausted. I know how it looks. No. She interrupted. You don't. Our employees are scared. Our customers are disappearing. The bank is watching us. The police are circling us every day. Her eyes filled with tears, and you still won't tell me what's happening. For several seconds, Malcolm considered telling her everything. About Rebecca Sloan, about the FBI, about the hidden surveillance system quietly recording every threat. Instead, he gently placed both hands on his sister's shoulders. If I tell you everything, you'll be in even more danger. She searched his face. So there really is something. There is. Can you promise we're going to survive this? Malcolm answered without hesitation. I can promise one thing. I will never surrender this business to corrupt men. Tanya hugged her brother tightly. Neither of them noticed the tiny microphone hidden inside the emergency exit sign above the office door. Late that night, Malcolm drove to a quiet federal safe house where Rebecca Sloan waited. She spread several legal documents across the conference table. The federal judge approved expanded surveillance this afternoon. She slid another encrypted equipment case toward him. We're covering every blind spot. Warehouse, delivery trucks, office, loading dock, even exterior lighting. Malcolm opened the case. The network keeps growing, Rebecca nodded. So does Keller's confidence. She looked directly at Malcolm. We believe he's preparing something much bigger than inspections. What? We don't know yet. But he's pushing too hard. That usually means he's getting ready to end the game. The next afternoon, while Malcolm installed the final encrypted camera inside a delivery truck, Keller sat across from Councilman Hale in a private office at City Hall. A thick folder rested between them. Hale flipped through several pages before stopping at one document. This affidavit isn't enough. It doesn't need to be true, Keller replied calmly. It only needs to convince a judge long enough to sign. Hale looked uneasy. If this fails, it won't. Keller smiled confidently. By the time anyone asks questions, Malcolm Reed will already be wearing handcuffs. He closed the folder. Inside lay a freshly signed search warrant based entirely on manipulated testimony and fabricated evidence. Across town, Caleb sat alone in his truck staring at the folded note containing the warehouse access codes. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, one new message. Your brother's freedom depends on your next decision. Caleb closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he wondered whether protecting one innocent man meant sacrificing another. He had less than 2 days to choose. And somewhere inside police headquarters, officers were already preparing for the raid that would destroy Malcolm Reed's life. 46 hours after Officer Dean Mercer threatened Caleb Morris, Belmont woke to the sound of police sirens. At Reed Community Supply, Malcolm had barely unlocked the front doors when Caleb hurried across the parking lot, his face pale and his breathing uneven. "I need to tell you something." Malcolm noticed the fear in his employee's eyes. "What happened?" Caleb reached into his pocket and slowly placed a folded sheet of paper on the counter. "The warehouse access codes." Malcolm looked at him quietly. "They forced you." Tears filled Caleb's eyes. "They said they'd send my brother back to prison if I didn't cooperate." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Malcolm placed a reassuring hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You didn't come here to betray me." Caleb looked confused. "You came here because your conscience brought you back." "I already gave them the codes." "I know." Caleb's heart nearly stopped. You know." Malcolm nodded. "I expected Keller to pressure someone close to me." Caleb lowered his head in shame. "I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for." Malcolm leaned closer. "Did you activate the emergency protocol before giving them access?" Caleb blinked in surprise. "You told me months ago. If anything ever felt wrong, press the red maintenance switch." A faint smile crossed Malcolm's face. "You remembered." "I activated it before I left." Malcolm nodded once. Then everything after that has already been copied. Caleb didn't fully understand what Malcolm meant. But for the first time in days, he saw calm instead of fear in Malcolm's eyes. Outside, 3 unmarked SUVs slowly entered the parking lot. Then came 2 patrol cars. Then another. Customers inside the store turned toward the windows. Tanya looked outside. Oh no. The front doors burst open. "Police, nobody move!" Nearly a dozen officers flooded into the building. Mercer immediately pointed toward Malcolm. "Hands where I can see them." Malcolm slowly raised both hands. Customers backed away in panic. Several employees instinctively stepped toward Malcolm. "Stay back!" Mercer shouted, drawing his weapon. Lieutenant Travis Keller entered last. Unlike the others, he wasn't in a hurry. He walked through the store, almost casually studying the shelves with a satisfied smile. So, he looked around. This is how successful businesses come to an end. He held up a folded search warrant. "We have credible evidence that this property is being used to store stolen construction equipment, illegal firearms, and falsified financial records." Tanya stepped forward. "That's ridiculous." Mercer shoved her backward with one arm. "I said stay back." She stumbled into a display of paint cans before employees caught her. Malcolm's voice remained calm. "Lieutenant Keller, you know none of that is true." Keller smiled. The judge disagreed. Within seconds, officers spread throughout the building. Storage shelves were emptied. Office cabinets were thrown open. File drawers crashed onto the floor. One officer deliberately swept framed photographs from Malcolm's desk. Glass exploded across the office. Another ripped community certificates from the wall before tossing them into a pile of broken wood and paper. Customers watched in stunned silence. Several quietly raised their phones to record. Mercer noticed. No filming. He grabbed one customer's phone and threw it across the concrete floor. The screen shattered instantly. Meanwhile, Detective Laura Vance quietly entered Malcolm's private office carrying an ordinary evidence bag. No one followed her. No one except a tiny hidden camera concealed inside the smoke detector above the doorway. She closed the office door, looked over both shoulders, then slowly removed a black semi-automatic pistol from beneath her jacket. Her hands trembled. "This is wrong," she whispered to herself. But she placed the weapon inside Malcolm's locked cabinet anyway. She photographed it, then radioed Keller. "I found something." Outside, Keller's smile widened. "I knew we would." Two officers emerged from the warehouse pushing a pallet loaded with expensive construction equipment. Equipment Malcolm had never purchased. Mercer shouted loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Recovered stolen property!" Gasps echoed throughout the store. Malcolm looked toward the warehouse. "I've never seen those machines." "No," Keller asked. "Then perhaps your inventory has a mind of its own." He turned toward waiting reporters gathering outside the entrance. "You'll want pictures of this." Flashes exploded from every direction. Mercer suddenly grabbed Malcolm by the shoulder. "Down!" He slammed Malcolm face first against the checkout counter. The impact knocked invoices onto the floor. Before Malcolm could steady himself, Mercer twisted both arms behind his back. The handcuffs snapped shut. Customers cried out in disbelief. Tanya rushed forward. "Stop! You're hurting him!" Another officer blocked her path. "One more step, and you're under arrest too." Mercer's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Funny. You refused Keller's envelope. Now you're wearing government jewelry instead." Keller slowly picked up the evidence bag containing the planted pistol. He lifted it high above his head. "Cameras ready." Television crews outside immediately focused their lenses. "The city trusted this black businessman," Keller announced dramatically. "But today we uncovered the truth hiding behind his good reputation." Malcolm met Keller's eyes without saying a word. That silence irritated Keller more than any argument could have. He pointed toward the ceiling. "Destroy every security camera." Battens smashed visible cameras one after another. Officers ripped DVR units from the office. Computer servers were unplugged and loaded into evidence boxes. Mercer laughed. "There goes your proof." Across the parking lot, inside an unmarked federal surveillance vehicle, Special Agent Rebecca Sloan watched dozens of encrypted video feeds continue streaming uninterrupted onto her laptop. Every hidden camera remained online. Every hidden microphone was still transmitting. Every word Keller spoke was being copied directly to secure FBI servers hundreds of miles away. A younger agent beside her looked uneasy. "We have enough." Rebecca's eyes never left the screen. "Not yet. If we move now, Keller becomes the only arrest." She watched another live feed as Keller quietly pulled Mercer aside near the loading dock. "Prepare the second package." "The house?" Mercer asked. Keller nodded. "We're finishing this today." Rebecca's expression hardened. "They're moving to phase 2. Inside the store, Malcolm was escorted toward a patrol car. As he passed the front entrance, he glanced upward for only a fraction of a second, toward an ordinary white smoke detector. The tiny green light inside blinked once, then again. The message was clear. Everything had been recorded. Everything. The steel door of the interrogation room slammed shut behind Malcolm Reed. For the first time since the raid, there were no television cameras. No customers, no employees, only silence. Malcolm sat with his hands cuffed to a metal ring bolted beneath the table. A bruise had already begun forming along his cheek, where Officer Dean Mercer had driven his face into the checkout counter. 10 minutes later, Lieutenant Travis Keller walked in carrying a thick case file. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he casually placed photographs across the table one by one. The planted pistol, the so-called stolen construction equipment, boxes of fabricated financial records. Each picture had already been stamped evidence. Keller finally took a seat. You know what's fascinating about evidence? Malcolm remained silent. It doesn't need to tell the truth. It only needs to tell a believable story. He slid a document across the table. A confession. Malcolm glanced down. The statement claimed he had knowingly purchased stolen equipment through criminal suppliers and hidden illegal firearms to protect his operation. If you sign it, Keller said calmly, I'll recommend a lighter sentence. Malcolm looked directly into his eyes. I won't confess to crimes you invented. Keller sighed. You built this business for 15 years. He leaned forward. Do you really want your late wife's name remembered beside the word criminal? For the first time, Malcolm's jaw tightened. Angela's name was the only weapon Keller had found that could still wound him. Keller noticed. There it is. I was wondering whether you still had feelings. Malcolm slowly pushed the confession back. My wife spent her life teaching people to stand when it would be easier to kneel. I'm honoring her, not destroying her memory. Keller's smile vanished. He gathered the papers without another word. You'll regret that. As soon as he left, Mercer entered through another door. This time there were no cameras visible, no recording equipment, only concrete walls. Mercer grabbed Malcolm by the front of his shirt and pulled him to his feet. You think you're brave? He drove Malcolm hard against the wall. The impact echoed through the empty hallway. You embarrassed Keller. Another punch struck Malcolm in the ribs. Mercer lowered his voice. Nobody's watching now. He raised his fist again, but Malcolm deliberately shifted sideways. Mercer's next shove carried him directly beneath an old maintenance camera mounted near the ceiling. A tiny red light blinked. Mercer froze. You! Malcolm calmly looked up. I guess somebody is watching. Mercer stepped backward immediately. He straightened Malcolm's shirt, opened the interrogation room door, and walked away without another word. Even corrupt officers understood the danger of an unexpected recording. Across town, a second police team executed another search warrant. This time they targeted Malcolm's home. Tanya stood helplessly in the living room as officers opened closets, emptied drawers, and searched every room. One officer quietly slipped an envelope containing fabricated financial ledgers beneath a bedroom dresser. Another loudly shouted, "Found suspicious records." Tanya stared in disbelief. Those weren't there. No one listened. Outside neighbors gathered along the sidewalk. Some whispered. Others simply watched. By sunset, every local news station carried the same headline: Black business owner faces expanding criminal investigation. The damage spread faster than Malcolm had imagined. His business accounts were temporarily frozen. Pending city contracts were suspended. Insurance providers announced policy reviews. 3 longtime suppliers canceled credit agreements. Employees gathered outside the locked hardware store, staring at the notice taped across the entrance. Business closed, pending investigation. No one spoke. Elias Grant finally broke the silence. He gave half this neighborhood its first job. One young employee wiped away tears. What happens to us now? No one had an answer. Late that afternoon, Malcolm was released on bond. The walk out of the courthouse felt longer than any prison sentence. Television reporters crowded around him. "Mr. Reed, did you traffic stolen equipment? Did you threaten witnesses? Is the firearm yours?" Malcolm answered only once. The truth hasn't changed. I didn't commit these crimes." He climbed into Tanya's truck. Neither sibling spoke during the drive home. Halfway there, Tanya finally whispered, "I wanted to believe everything would be okay." She struggled to keep her voice steady. "But today, I saw people looking at us like strangers." Malcolm stared through the windshield. "Ma, that's exactly what Keller wanted." That evening, Malcolm arrived at a secure federal office. Rebecca Sloan was already waiting. She placed a tablet on the conference table. Without speaking, she played several synchronized video feeds. One showed Detective Laura Vance planting the pistol. Another captured officers unloading stolen construction equipment from an unmarked truck before carrying it into Malcolm's warehouse. A third recorded Keller quietly instructing Mercer where each item should be placed. Malcolm watched silently until the final clip ended. "You had all of this," Rebecca nodded. "Every second. You watched them destroy my business." Pain filled Malcolm's voice. "You watched them humiliate my employees. You watched them arrest me. And you did nothing." Rebecca didn't defend herself immediately. Finally, she answered quietly, "If we stopped the raid, Keller would lose one case." She pulled another folder onto the table. Inside were photographs of dozens of businesses. Restaurants, repair shops, convenience stores, auto garages. They've been doing this for years. She met Malcolm's eyes. "We're not trying to save one business. We're trying to stop an entire criminal network." Malcolm looked down at the photographs. Every face represented another family, another livelihood, another victim. Slowly, his anger gave way to determination. "So we finish it." Rebecca nodded once. "We finish it." At that exact moment, inside Belmont Police Headquarters, Keller stood over a city map. He pointed to Malcolm's home, then to Tanya's office, finally to Reed Community Supply. "They're hurting," Mercer said. "Good." Keller smiled coldly. "When desperate people lose everything, they eventually sign anything." He folded Malcolm's unsigned confession and slipped it back into the file. "We're going after his sister next." Neither man realized every word inside that supposedly private office was already being captured by a hidden FBI microphone installed months before during a courthouse renovation contract. And for the first time since the raid, Rebecca Sloan smiled. Keller had just given the FBI exactly what they still needed. The morning after Malcolm Reed was released on bond, he drove straight to the federal field office. The exhaustion in his face was impossible to hide. As soon as Rebecca Sloan entered the conference room, Malcolm closed the door behind her. "I'm done waiting." Rebecca looked at him quietly. "My sister is being followed. My business is closed. My employees are losing their homes. And Keller just threatened Tanya." He placed both hands on the table. "If the FBI has enough, arrest him today." Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened a secure laptop. A live aerial feed appeared. An unmarked SUV sat across the street from Tanya's apartment. Another federal vehicle followed her accountant to work. A third surveillance team watched Reed Community Supply from a nearby warehouse. "We've already assigned protective surveillance." Malcolm frowned. "You never told me." If Keller knew we were protecting Tanya, he'd change his plan. She leaned closer. "Trust me one more time." Malcolm slowly nodded. For her. For everyone. That afternoon, Keller summoned Malcolm back to police headquarters under the pretense of reviewing additional evidence. The interrogation room looked exactly the same. Only one document rested on the table: the confession. Keller calmly pushed it forward. Your sister's financial records look interesting. Malcolm didn't move. I wouldn't worry if I were you. Keller smiled. Unless we decide she's helping you hide money. You leave Tanya out of this. I can. Keller folded his hands. Sign. Silence filled the room. If you confess, Keller continued, your sister walks away. If you don't, he shrugged. Conspiracy charges destroy families every day. Malcolm stared at the blank signature line. For the first time since this nightmare began, his resolve wavered. Not because he feared prison, because he feared losing the only family he had left. Meanwhile, Caleb Morris sat alone inside his pickup truck outside the closed hardware store. He could no longer carry the weight alone. He drove directly to Tanya's house. When she opened the door, Caleb couldn't even look at her. I betrayed Malcolm. Tanya's expression hardened. What are you talking about? I gave Keller the warehouse access codes. The words hit like a punch. You, what? They threatened my brother. I thought I could protect him. They said they'd send him back to prison. Tanya stepped backward. Tears filled her eyes. You helped them destroy everything. I know. Caleb's voice cracked. I'll regret it for the rest of my life. She wanted to slam the door. She wanted to tell him never to return. Instead, what aren't you telling me? Caleb slowly raised his head. Before I gave them the codes, I activated Malcolm's emergency maintenance switch. What does that mean? I don't know exactly, but Malcolm told me. If anything ever felt wrong, press it first. That evening, Tanya drove directly to the federal office. Rebecca Sloan listened carefully before asking one question. Exactly which switch? Caleb described its location. Rebecca immediately smiled. He did it. Confused, Tanya looked between them. What are you talking about? Rebecca opened another encrypted screen. Rows of synchronized recordings filled the monitor. The emergency switch wasn't an alarm. It activated the continuous federal transmission protocol. She turned toward Caleb. Because of you. The FBI has every second of the raid. Caleb stared at the screen in disbelief. I thought I ruined everything. Rebecca shook her head. You nearly saved the entire investigation. Across town, Samantha Cole sat alone in the newsroom reviewing hundreds of police photographs from the raid. Something bothered her. She enlarged one image, then another, then a third. Her eyes widened. The digital timestamps didn't match. Several photographs showing officers discovering evidence had been taken 23 minutes before the search warrant officially became active. That's impossible. She immediately requested the original metadata from the station's archive. The results confirmed it. Someone had staged the photographs before the legal search even existed. Samantha quietly closed her office door. For the first time, she wasn't investigating Malcolm Reed. She was investigating the Belmont Police Department. Elsewhere, Detective Laura Vance sat alone inside the evidence storage room. She stared at the sealed firearm she had planted inside Malcolm's office. Her hands trembled. The door suddenly opened. Keller walked in. "We're almost finished." Laura forced a smile. "What happens after the hearing?" Keller looked directly at her. "If anyone starts asking questions, you handled the evidence." She felt the blood drain from her face. "You said we were protected. We are. Unless somebody needs a scapegoat." Without another word, Keller walked away. Laura stood frozen. For the first time, she realized she wasn't Keller's partner. She was insurance. That night, she quietly unlocked the evidence archive. From a restricted cabinet, she removed one document, the original evidence log. It showed the pistol had entered police custody, 2 days before Malcolm's raid. Laura copied every page, then hid the originals inside a sealed envelope beneath the false bottom of her desk drawer. Late that evening, Mercer supervised officers destroying what they believed was the final remaining evidence: security hard drives, broken cameras, storage servers. Everything was thrown into metal barrels inside an abandoned warehouse. Gasoline splashed across the pile. Mercer struck a match. Flames exploded into the night. He laughed. No recordings. No witnesses. No case. Neither he nor the officers noticed 2 infrared cameras hidden nearly 300 yards away. Federal agents silently documented every second. The following morning, every television station in Belmont carried breaking news. City Council to hold special public hearing on the Malcolm Reed case. Lieutenant Keller would personally present the evidence. Councilman Robert Hale would recommend permanent closure of Reed Community Supply. Reporters called it the city's biggest corruption case in years. At the federal office, Rebecca Sloan handed Malcolm a dark blue suit. "Wear this tomorrow." He looked at her. "What do I say?" She met his eyes. "Nothing." Rebecca closed the case file. "Tomorrow. You let Keller tell his entire story." She paused. "And when he's convinced the whole city he's won." A calm smile crossed her face. "We'll play every recording he never knew existed." Malcolm took a slow breath. For the first time since the handcuffs closed around his wrists, he believed justice was finally within reach. By 9 o'clock the next morning, every seat inside Belmont City Hall was filled. Television cameras lined the walls. Local business owners sat shoulder to shoulder with city employees, reporters, and residents who had followed Malcolm Reed's case for weeks. Outside, hundreds more watched on giant screens erected for the live broadcast. To many of them, today's hearing would answer one question: was Malcolm Reed a respected businessman? Or the criminal Lieutenant Travis Keller claimed he had always been at exactly 9:30. Councilman Robert Hale struck the gavel. "This special public hearing is now in session." His voice echoed confidently through the chamber. "We are here to examine evidence concerning Reed Community Supply and determine whether its business license should be permanently revoked." Cameras immediately turned toward Malcolm. He sat quietly beside his attorney wearing the navy blue suit Rebecca Sloan had given him. His expression revealed nothing. Across the aisle, Keller adjusted his uniform with unmistakable confidence. He looked less like a witness and more like a man arriving to collect a trophy. Hale nodded toward Keller. "Lieutenant, you may begin." Keller rose slowly. He walked to the center of the room, carrying a thick evidence binder. "For months," he began, "my department investigated what appeared to be a respected local business." He paused dramatically. What we actually discovered was a carefully disguised criminal operation. Large monitors lit up behind him. Photographs from the raid filled the screens. The planted firearm, the expensive construction equipment, boxes of fabricated financial records. Gasps spread across the audience. Keller pointed toward Malcolm. This man spent years convincing Belmont he deserved its trust. But behind locked doors, he was hiding stolen property and illegal weapons. Several reporters immediately began typing. Television commentators whispered into microphones. The narrative sounded convincing, exactly as Keller intended. Next came the videos. Edited surveillance clips showed Malcolm walking through his warehouse shortly before officers allegedly discovered stolen equipment. Another clip appeared to show him locking his office moments before the planted firearm was found. Without context, without timestamps, the footage looked devastating. Councilman Hale leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, would you like to explain these recordings?" Before Malcolm could answer, Samantha Cole stood from the press section. "I have a question." Hale frowned. "This isn't a press conference. It concerns the evidence." Reluctantly, Hale nodded. Samantha held up several printed photographs. "Why do police photographs showing the discovery of evidence carry timestamps 23 minutes before the search warrant became legally active?" The room suddenly became quiet. Keller answered immediately. "Camera clocks are often inaccurate." Samantha didn't sit down. "I checked the original metadata. So did 2 independent forensic analysts." She looked directly at Hale. "They agree the timestamps weren't altered." Keller's smile faded for only a second. Then he recovered. "A clerical issue doesn't change what officers found." Several people nodded. Others looked uncertain. The hearing continued. Mercer carried the sealed evidence bag to the front of the chamber. Inside rested the pistol allegedly recovered from Malcolm's office. He placed it on the evidence table. This firearm was secured exactly where Detective Laura Vance reported finding it. Hale looked toward Malcolm again. "Do you deny this weapon belonged to you?" "I do. And yet your denial is unsupported." Before Malcolm answered, Tanya rose from the audience. "My brother has never owned that gun." Mercer immediately interrupted. "Family testimony isn't evidence. You'd say anything to protect him." Security officers motioned for Tanya to sit down. She reluctantly obeyed. Nearly an hour passed. Keller seemed stronger with every presentation. He displayed financial spreadsheets, supplier lists, warehouse inventories. Each document had been carefully fabricated to reinforce the same story. Finally, he closed the binder. "The Belmont Police Department respectfully recommends permanent closure of Reed Community Supply. We further recommend additional criminal charges against Malcolm Reed." Applause erupted from a small group seated near the back. Several television commentators quietly predicted Malcolm's business would never recover. Councilman Hale looked toward Malcolm. "Mr. Reed, this is your opportunity. You may respond." Every camera focused on him. Reporters lifted microphones. The entire chamber waited. Malcolm slowly stood. He looked neither angry nor defeated. Instead, he appeared strangely calm. "I won't ask anyone here to believe me because of my reputation." His voice remained steady. "I won't ask for sympathy." He paused. "I only have one question." He turned toward Keller. "Lieutenant, are you absolutely certain that every recording from my business was destroyed?" A few people exchanged confused glances. Keller laughed openly. "I personally supervised the seizure. We smashed every visible camera. We removed every recording server. There isn't a surviving second of footage." Malcolm nodded slightly. "I thought that's what you'd say." Keller smiled triumphantly. You've run out of arguments. No, Malcolm replied softly. You've just finished making yours. At that exact moment, the heavy chamber doors opened. Every head turned. Detective Laura Vance walked inside carrying a sealed brown evidence envelope. She walked past Keller without making eye contact. His confident smile returned. He assumed she had come to reinforce the department's case. Instead, Laura stopped beside Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Price. Without speaking, she placed the envelope into his hands. Daniel opened it. His expression changed instantly. Before anyone could react, several men and women in dark suits quietly entered through side entrances. They spread throughout the chamber. No one noticed until the doors behind them quietly clicked shut. Councilman Hale frowned. What is the meaning of this? A calm voice answered from the rear of the room. It means, this hearing is no longer under your control. Every person in the chamber turned. Special Agent Rebecca Sloan stepped forward, an FBI credential held clearly in her hand. She looked directly at Travis Keller. From this moment forward, this is a federal matter. The confident expression Keller had worn all morning disappeared for the very first time. A silence unlike anything Belmont City Hall had ever known settled over the chamber. Lieutenant Travis Keller stared at Rebecca Sloan. Then he laughed. Not because he found anything amusing, because he believed confidence could still intimidate everyone watching. This is a city hearing, Keller said. The FBI has no authority to interrupt local proceedings. Rebecca Sloan calmly removed a folded document from her briefcase and handed it to Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Price. Daniel placed it before Councilman Robert Hale. A federal seizure order, he said evenly. Signed this morning by the United States District Court. Hale's hands began to tremble. Rebecca turned toward the television cameras. For the record, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been conducting a long-term public corruption investigation involving members of the Belmont Police Department and associated public officials. The room erupted. Reporters immediately stood. Camera flashes exploded across the chamber. Television anchors interrupted their own broadcasts. This hearing is now part of an active federal criminal investigation. Keller forced a smile. You've been manipulated. He pointed toward Malcolm. That man fed you lies because he wanted revenge. Rebecca didn't answer him. Instead, she looked toward the audiovisual technician standing beside the projection system. Screen 1. The lights dimmed. The first video appeared. It showed Reed Community Supply 3 months earlier. Lieutenant Keller stood beside Malcolm's checkout counter. Every face in the room recognized the scene immediately. The audio played clearly. Every successful business contributes, Keller's recorded voice said. Contributes to what? Malcolm asked. The people who make sure success continues. The room became absolutely still. Rebecca paused the recording. No editing. No enhancement. One original encrypted transmission. Keller immediately shouted, "Fake." Rebecca nodded once. Let's continue. A second recording filled the screen. Officer Dean Mercer stood beside Caleb Morris in the parking lot. Everyone watched Mercer hand Caleb a folded note. Then his voice echoed through the chamber. Your brother enjoys sleeping in his own bed. You've got 48 hours. Caleb slowly stood from the audience. His voice shook. That's exactly what happened. Mercer looked toward him with pure hatred. You lying little... Sit down. The command came from Daniel Price. Mercer froze. Rebecca raised one finger. Screen 2. Another hidden camera recording appeared. This time the audience watched Detective Laura Vance enter Malcolm's private office during the raid. The timestamp remained visible. Laura looked over both shoulders. She removed a black pistol from beneath her jacket. Then, she placed it inside Malcolm's locked cabinet. Someone gasped loudly. Another person whispered, "My God." Laura lowered her head. "I planted it." Her voice barely carried across the room. "Keller ordered me to." Every television camera instantly turned toward Keller. He stood perfectly still, allowing him time to recover. Screen 3. The warehouse appeared. Officers unloaded expensive construction equipment from an unmarked police truck. Mercer personally directed where each machine should be placed. Then Keller's voice became unmistakable. "Spread them out. Make it look like he's been hiding them for months." The audience erupted. People shouted from the gallery. Business owners who had once doubted Malcolm stared in disbelief. Several council members exchanged horrified looks. Hale's face had turned completely pale. Keller slammed his fist against the table. "Those videos are fabricated," Rebecca calmly replied. "Fortunately, we didn't rely on only one camera." She nodded toward the technician again. Every monitor inside the chamber suddenly split into dozens of synchronized windows. Smoke detector cameras, emergency exit cameras, loading dock cameras, warehouse ceiling cameras, delivery truck cameras, office cameras, parking lot cameras. Each displayed the exact same moments from different angles. Every timestamp matched perfectly. Every movement aligned to the second. Rebecca spoke softly. While Lieutenant Keller believed destroying visible cameras destroyed the truth. She looked directly at him. He never discovered that every recording had already been transmitted to secure FBI servers in real time. The confidence vanished from Keller's face. For the first time, fear replaced it. Daniel Price opened Laura's sealed envelope. Inside rested the original evidence log. He held it high enough for the cameras to see. This document records that the firearm entered Belmont Police Evidence Storage. He paused. 2 days before the search of Malcolm Reed's business. A stunned silence followed. Laura nodded slowly. "I changed the log after Lieutenant Keller ordered me to. I falsified official evidence. And I'm prepared to testify under oath." Keller stared at her in disbelief. "You made a deal." Laura met his eyes. "No. You abandoned me first." Before Keller could respond, Samantha Cole approached the witness microphone carrying a folder. "I'd like these entered into the record." Daniel accepted the documents. The original metadata from every police photograph. He examined them briefly. The photographs presented by Lieutenant Keller were taken 23 minutes before the search warrant became legally active. Samantha looked toward the cameras. That means the so-called discovery of evidence had already been staged before officers were legally allowed inside the building. A wave of disbelief swept through the chamber. Rebecca wasn't finished. Final recording. The lights dimmed once more. This video came not from Malcolm's store, but from inside Belmont Police Headquarters. Keller and Mercer stood over a city map. Everyone listened. "When desperate people lose everything," Keller said, "they eventually sign anything." Mercer laughed. "What about his sister? We're going after her next." Another voice entered. Councilman Robert Hale. "Just make sure nothing leads back to my office before the election." Keller smiled. "Relax. Once the city sees Malcolm in handcuffs, nobody will care where the evidence came from." The recording ended. No one moved. No one spoke. The truth had become impossible to deny. Councilman Hale slowly pushed back his chair. He looked around desperately. I can explain, Rebecca interrupted. You'll have that opportunity. She nodded once toward the agents positioned around the room. Now. At the same instant, FBI agents stepped forward. Lieutenant Travis Keller. You're under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, and multiple federal corruption offenses. Another team approached Mercer. A third surrounded Councilman Hale. None of them resisted. Keller finally turned toward Malcolm. His voice was barely above a whisper. You planned this. Malcolm calmly shook his head. No. You planned it. You just never realized? Someone else was recording. An FBI agent removed the ceremonial handcuffs displayed as evidence against Malcolm. Before the entire city, Daniel Price announced, effective immediately, every criminal charge against Malcolm Reed is dismissed. His record is cleared. The audience slowly rose to its feet. One person began clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire chamber echoed with applause. Not for a courtroom victory, not for a legal technicality, but for a man whose dignity had survived every lie meant to destroy it. As Keller was escorted toward the exit, he looked back one final time. No one looked at him with fear anymore. They looked at him with the same disbelief he had once expected the city to reserve for Malcolm Reed. 6 months later, the courtroom where Malcolm Reed had once stood as a defendant became the place where justice finally caught up with the people who believed they were untouchable. Every seat was occupied. Former business owners filled the gallery. Television crews broadcast the federal trial nationwide. The same reporters who had once called Malcolm a suspected criminal now waited to hear the verdict against the officers who had framed him. Lieutenant Travis Keller no longer wore a polished uniform. Instead, he sat at the defense table in a plain gray suit, his shoulders slumped, his confidence gone. Beside him sat Dean Mercer. Neither man looked toward the gallery. Neither wanted to meet the eyes of the people they had terrorized for years. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Price rose for the government's closing argument. For years, he began, these defendants used badges not to protect innocent people, but to frighten them. He looked toward the jury. They planted evidence. They destroyed businesses. They manipulated courts. And they violated the very Constitution they swore to defend. He paused. They believed power meant no one could hold them accountable. He pointed toward Malcolm. They were wrong. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom stood. The foreperson unfolded the verdict. We find the defendant, Travis Keller, guilty. On all counts. The words echoed through the courtroom. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of extortion. Guilty of evidence tampering. Guilty of obstruction of justice. Guilty of violating civil rights under color of law. One guilty verdict followed another. Mercer received the same outcome. Councilman Robert Hale was convicted of bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction. Detective Laura Vance, after fully cooperating with federal prosecutors and admitting her role, received a substantially reduced sentence and entered witness protection following repeated threats from members of the corruption network. Judge Eleanor Whitmore looked directly at Keller. You did not merely betray individual citizens. You betrayed every honest officer who wears a badge with integrity. The court sentences you accordingly. As federal marshals led Keller away in handcuffs, he glanced toward Malcolm. For months he had imagined seeing Malcolm leave in chains. Instead, he was the one disappearing through the courtroom doors. Outside the courthouse, Microphones surrounded Malcolm once again. This time the questions were different. Mr. Reed, do you feel vindicated? Will you sue the city? What message do you have for other business owners? Malcolm answered carefully. I never wanted revenge. I wanted the truth. And today, the truth finally spoke louder than fear. Within weeks, every criminal charge against Malcolm was formally dismissed with prejudice. The city restored every business license. Frozen bank accounts were released. Insurance contracts were reinstated. The federal government announced a substantial civil rights settlement in Malcolm's favor. When reporters asked whether he planned to buy a larger company or retire comfortably, Malcolm simply smiled. I already know where every dollar is going. On a bright Saturday morning, the familiar sign outside Reed Community Supply rose once again. Grand reopening. Hundreds of neighbors gathered before sunrise. Former customers, employees, church leaders, construction crews, families, even people who had once believed the accusations waited quietly in line. As Malcolm unlocked the front doors, applause broke out across the parking lot. The first person to step forward surprised everyone. An elderly contractor removed his cap. I stopped shopping here. I believed what they said. He lowered his eyes. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Malcolm extended his hand. We rebuild homes every day. People deserve the chance to rebuild too. The old man shook his hand with tears in his eyes. One by one, others apologized. Malcolm accepted every apology. Not because he had forgotten what happened, but because refusing bitterness was another way of refusing to let Keller win. Inside the newly restored office, Tanya Reed hung the repaired Community Leadership Award back on the wall. The cracked frame had been replaced. The broken glass was gone. She smiled. They destroyed it once. Malcolm looked at the award. They reminded us why it mattered. Nearby, Caleb Morris supervised the installation of upgraded security systems for several neighboring businesses. After everything that had happened, Malcolm promoted him to Director of Security Operations. You trusted me after I failed you, Caleb said quietly. Malcolm shook his head. You made one mistake under fear. What mattered was what you did afterward. Caleb nodded. I won't waste that second chance. Weeks later, Samantha Cole published the final chapter of her investigation. The headlines spread across the country. The recordings they never knew existed how one business owner helped expose a city's corruption. Her series won National Journalism Awards. More importantly, it encouraged dozens of frightened business owners to come forward with stories they had hidden for years. Federal investigators reopened several additional corruption cases in neighboring counties. With part of the settlement money, Malcolm established the Angela Reed Justice and Technology Foundation, named in honor of his late wife. The organization provided encrypted security systems, legal assistance, and emergency investigative support for small businesses facing intimidation or corruption. During the foundation's opening ceremony, Rebecca Sloan quietly approached Malcolm. I've been doing this job for 23 years, she smiled. I've collected thousands of hours of evidence. But evidence alone never changes history. She extended her hand. You did. Malcolm looked across the crowd. Families laughed outside the reopened store. Employees welcomed customers. Children pointed toward freshly painted delivery trucks. Hope had returned to the neighborhood. I didn't do it alone, he replied. No, Rebecca said, but you were the first person who refused to surrender. Before leaving, Malcolm gathered his employees together near the front entrance. He looked at each familiar face. There will always be people who believe power gives them permission to take away another person's dignity. He paused. They're wrong. Dignity doesn't come from a badge. It doesn't come from money. It doesn't come from public opinion. It comes from choosing to stand for the truth, even when standing alone costs you everything. The employees applauded. Customers joined them. Outside, the morning sun reflected across the windows of Reed Community Supply. The same building that had once been surrounded by police cars now stood filled with neighbors, laughter, and honest work once again. The lies had lasted only a season. The truth had built something that would outlive every one of them.
Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving your enemies wrong, it's refusing to become like them. Truth may take time, but integrity leaves evidence that no lie can erase forever. If this story moved, you share your thoughts in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories celebrating courage, justice, and hope.